Hello and welcome to Star Diary, the podcast from the makers of BBC Sky at Night magazine. You can subscribe to the digital edition of the magazine by visiting iTunes, Google Play or Apple News, or to the print edition by visiting skyatnightmagazine.com.
Greetings listeners, and welcome to Star Diary, a weekly guide to the best things to see in the Northern Hemisphere's night sky. As we are based here in the UK, all times are in GMT. In this episode, we'll be covering the coming week from the 6th to the 12th of January. I'm features editor Ezzy Pearson, and I'm joined this week by astronomy writer Katrin Rayner. Hello, Katrin.
Hi, Ezzy. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. What do we have to look forward to in this week's night sky?
Okie dokie. Well, the moon is reaching first quarter, and there are a couple of clear obscure effects to get in your diary. We all love a clear obscure effect. We also have another lunar occultation, but it's not a planet this time. And it's also an excellent week to observe Mars as it reaches perigee and gets ever closer to opposition next week. So starting with the moon, on the 6th, we have a first quarter moon, which is the best time to see two clear obscure effects. The clear obscure effects are a favourite for moon watchers, and tonight we can spot Lunar X and Lunar V, so two letters on the moon. You will need an optical aid to spot these two, and the best time to look for them is around 6:20 in the evening. So the illusion of Lunar X is created by sunlight falling on the rims and ridges between the craters of Lacaille, Blanchini and Purback, and the V is caused by light illuminating crater Eucurt, along with several smaller craters. Now, Ezzy, I have spotted these in the past, but when it was my first time, I actually just took a photograph of the moon and I looked for them later on because I wasn't entirely sure where I was looking. And it was actually really fun to download that picture on my laptop and then just try and spot them. I remember kind of like shrieking with joy at seeing them both. So yeah, I think that's quite a useful tip. If it's the first time you are trying to spot them, because if you aren't entirely familiar with where the craters are on the lunar surface, I think taking a photo using your DSLR or smartphone and looking back, it's much easier and you will know where to look the next time. So yeah, I think that's one of my top tips.
Taking a photo of the moon with a DSLR or even your smartphone through the eyepiece is actually relatively easy. We have a bunch of guides about how to do that over on our website. I'll put some links down in the show notes. So if you do want to investigate that, it might be a good way, rather than sitting there at the eyepiece trying desperately to make everything stay steady when you're not really sure what you're doing. That might be a better way to look for those unusual features on the moon, the shadows of a V and an X. We should probably say, in case we have any newbies, a clair obscure is an effect of dark and shadow on the moon. So they are shadow effects that only appear at certain times when the sun is in the exact right position. So you only see them once every month, or not even. Sometimes it has to be specific times of when the moon is in a certain place. So that's what a clair obscure effect is.
Yes, that was a very good brief description there. Thank you, Ezzy. And yeah, if I can point my DSLR at the moon and manage to spot these effects, then anyone can.
You're not as much of a photographer as our other presenter,
No.
Mary, is, but that doesn't mean you can't have a go.
No, I'm definitely not much of a photographer. I enjoy looking through the telescope, but astrophotography, oh my gosh, the time and the patience that you need to do those kind of things, which, I think the smart telescopes, if you want to call them that, I think they're a really great piece of kit these days, because for people like me, it's kind of getting results more quickly and more easily than you would the more traditional methods, if you want to call them that. And yeah, on the 7th, Ezzy, we have another clear obscure effect for people to look out for. This time it's the eyes of Clavius. So at around midnight, locate crater Clavius to see a pair of eyes. And Clavius crater is located deep in the Southern Highlands to the south of Tycho. It's a really prominent crater during first and last quarter of the lunar phase. And this effect of a pair of eyes happens when the sun illuminates the rims of the satellite craters Clavius C and D, whilst the crater floor remains in shadow. So yeah, I suppose that what you've just described there with the light and shadow is perfect example or illustration on the moon then of these illuminations and shadows to create a pair of eyes. On the 8th of January, moon is at perigee, meaning it is at its closest point to Earth, and it's not a full moon, so of course it's not going to be a super moon. It's waxing gibbous at 67% illumination. And we were spoilt with supermoons in 2024. I think we had 4 or 5. I think I have to count on my fingers for this one. Was it August? We had 5 then, didn't we? From August through to December.
There was
Oh,
4, I think.
Oh, was it? Oh, no, I've got that wrong. I thought August was a supermoon. Or was it a blue moon?
It was a super blue. There was one in August, September, October, and November, and those were the 4.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got that wrong. I thought there was one in December as well. But yeah, we still got a long time to wait for supermoon in 2025 because this won't happen until November, which is a shame. But yes, on the 10th, something exciting is happening with the moon. So the 81% lit waxing gibbous moon is going to occult a portion of M45, the Pleiades, also known as the Seven Sisters. And this is going to happen in the early hours of the morning. So the moon is going to move in front of the star cluster starting at 1:30 a.m. and this ends at 4 a.m. So, of course, the moon is far too small, i.e., far too far away to cover the whole star cluster. And it is only covering the lower portion of it, which will hide 4 of the brighter stars.
Pelion, Atlas, Merope, and Alcyone.
And solar system wise, on the 7th, we have Titan shadow transiting Saturn in the late afternoon, just after sunset, which depressingly at this time of year is 4:04 p.m. in South Wales. So roll on the summer, I say. And if you want to have a go at looking at this transit, then time-wise, the transit begins at 4:24 and ends just after 9:30 p.m. So we've had quite a few shadow transits of Saturn over the past couple of months. And on the 10th, if you are out observing the occultation of the Pleiades in the early hours, then you'll be able to see bright Jupiter to the top left of the moon, which of course will be visible with the naked eye. And the reddish star below Jupiter, it's not Mars, but it is the star Aldebaran. And much dimmer Uranus will be around 7 to 8 degrees below the moon. And if you want to have a go at spotting Uranus, you're going to need your telescope to view the ice giant. But there's plenty going on, I think, in this area of the sky to keep you occupied on the 10th. And later on the evening of the 10th, Venus reaches its greatest elongation or separation from the sun with 47.2 degrees. And this is the best time of the month to see it. I'm sure you agree, Ezzy, Venus has been really spectacular in the evening sky for the past few months, even seeing it around sunset, it's against the backdrop of like an orangey yellow sky. It's really quite spectacular.
Venus has been particularly bright at the moment.
Yes.
It's quite hard to miss it.
That's it, yeah. And well, on the 10th, it will be shining at around magnitude minus 4.3. As we said, it's very hard to miss in the southwest after sunset. And if you're wondering what the star is to the top left of Venus, then this is Saturn. And this is going to be a great opportunity for telescope users to observe Saturn and Venus. And still sticking with the 10th, much later on at around 11:13 p.m., there will be a conjunction between the moon and Jupiter. The moon will pass above Jupiter with just over 5 degrees separation between the two. So this is going to look lovely as well. So the 10th is quite a bit happening for everyone. And then 2 days later on the 12th, we have Mars reaching its closest approach, its perigee to Earth since 2022, as it begins to line up with the Earth and Sun in a few days' time for opposition. And the best time to see Mars on the 12th is in the early hours, just before 1 a.m., when it will be 62 degrees above the southern horizon in Gemini. So yeah, it's going to be very high up in the sky. Now, unfortunately, if you fast forward 12 hours to the afternoon, this is when Mars is going to make its closest approach to us, just after 1:30 p.m. But of course, we won't see it at this time because it's daylight. But just to note, it's going to be 96 million kilometers away from us. But of course, as the day progresses and evening approaches, the red planet will be visible as it rises at around 5:15 p.m. in the northeast, and it will be visible all night long. So we also have the almost full moon, which has already risen, lodged between Mars and Jupiter. So again, another spectacular sight to see if you kind of scan your eyes from northeast towards the east. So photography opportunity, perhaps. And also on the 12th, we have the exceptionally bright Venus at dichotomy, which in layman's terms means that the planet is in its 50% phase. So it's going to be half lit. And just to recap, or just to make people aware, Venus does go through phases, just like the moon, Mercury, and Earth. And this is, of course, because the planet orbits the sun inside Earth's orbit. so you can observe the phases of Venus through a telescope like you would the moon. The cycle of phases takes a lot longer than the moon's. It takes 584 days to do so. But if you look to the south just before or after sunset to spot Venus, it's going to be visible until 8:50 p.m. And now I have used my 2-inch Dobsonian to see Venus in its crescent phase. So from my experience, you won't need a large scope to see the planet at dichotomy. So I'm imagining as even like a large pair of binoculars.
Yeah, I should imagine if you can see it with a 2-inch Dobsonian, I should imagine you'd be able to see it with a pair of. I don't actually know what the diameter of most binoculars are. And inches. I'm just trying to think. It's probably about 2 inches. So yeah.
Yeah, so give it a go if you do have a large pair of binoculars, because it'd be interesting to see that and hear if anyone does manage to see the Venus in its 50% phase.
It'll certainly be one to try and look out for, and I think I'm going to try and make out its 50% phase.
We have to make sure we both do that on the 12th, and then...
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for taking us through that week, Katrin. If people want to get even more stargazing highlights, please do subscribe to the podcast, and we'll be back next week with even more. But to summarise this week again, on the 6th, the clair-obscur effects visible on the moon will be the lunar X and the lunar V, which will both be seen from around about 6:20 p.m. On the 7th, the eyes of Clavius, another clair-obscur effect, will be visible at around about midnight on the lunar surface. And also on the 7th, Titan, a moon of Saturn, will transit the planet from around 4:24 p.m. On the 8th, the moon is at perigee, i.e. its closest point to Earth, whilst on the 10th, an 81% lit waxing gibbous moon occults the lower portion of the star cluster of the Pleiades in the early hours of the morning. Venus is going to reach its greatest elongation or separation from the Sun on the 10th as well, and we also have the conjunction between the Moon and Jupiter. Then finally, on the 12th, Mars reaches perigee, its closest approach since 2022. Venus is also at dichotomy at that time, so it's going to be 50% lit. So a good day. In fact, it's a good week for the planets in general. So do be sure to get out and look at those. Please let us know if you managed to see any particularly fine sights or take any good photographs at contact@sky@nightmagazine.com. I've put that in the links down below. And hopefully we'll see you all back here next week for even more stargazing highlights. From all of us here at Star Diary, goodbye. If you want to find out even more spectacular sights that will be gracing the night sky this month, be sure to pick up a copy of BBC Sky at Night magazine, where we have a 16-page pull-out sky guide with a full overview of everything worth looking up for throughout the whole month. Whether you like to look at the moon, the planets, or the deep sky, whether you use binoculars, telescopes, or neither, our Sky Guide has got you covered, with detailed star charts to help you track your way across the night sky. From all of us here at BBC Sky at Night magazine, goodbye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Star Diary podcast from the makers of BBC Sky at Night magazine. For more of our podcasts, visit our website at sky@nightmagazine.com/podcasts, or head to Spotify, iTunes, or your favourite podcast player.